All right, so here we are with lesson 3.11, passive transport. Can any molecule move freely through your cell membranes? The cell regulates most molecules that pass through the cell membrane. If a molecule is charged or very big, it won't make it through the cell membrane on its own. However, small, non-charged molecules like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water can pass through the cell membrane freely. Passive transport. Recall the cell membrane is semi-permeable. It does not allow everything to pass through. Some molecules can pass easily through your cell membranes, while others have more difficulty. Sometimes molecules need the help of special transport proteins to move across the cell membrane. Some molecules even need an input of energy to help get them across the cell membrane. The movement of molecules across the membrane without the input of energy is known as passive transport. When energy, in the form of ATP, is needed, the movement is known as active transport. Active transport moves molecules against their concentration gradient from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. Simple diffusion. One example of passive transport is diffusion. When molecules move from an area of high concentration, that there's a large amount, to an area of low concentration, or low amount, molecules are said to naturally flow down their concentration gradient. This type of diffusion proceeds without an input of energy. In simple diffusion, molecules that are small and uncharged can freely diffuse across the cell membrane. They simply flow through the cell membrane. Simple diffusion does not require energy or need the assistance of transport proteins. Other large or charged molecules that diffuse across the membrane may need assistance from a protein. Oxygen is a molecule that can freely diffuse across the cell membrane. For example, oxygen fuses out of the air sacs in your lungs into the bloodstream because oxygen is more concentrated in the lungs than in the blood. Oxygen moves from the high concentration of oxygen in the lungs to the low concentration of oxygen in your bloodstream. Carbon dioxide, which is exhaled, moves in the opposite direction, from a high concentration in your bloodstream to a low concentration in your lungs. Passive transport using membrane proteins. Sometimes molecules cannot move through the cell membrane on their own. These molecules need special transport proteins to help move them across the membrane, a process known as facilitative diffusion. These special proteins are called channel proteins or carrier proteins, and they are attached to the cell membrane. In fact, they go through the cell membrane from the inside to the outside of the cell. From the inside of the cell to the outside. Channel proteins move an open channel or passageway through the cell membrane for molecules to move across. Many channel proteins allow the diffusion of ions. Ions are charged atoms. The charge makes it difficult to cross the cell membrane without assistance. Channel proteins are specific for the molecule they transport. For example, a sodium ion crosses the membrane through a channel protein specific for sodium ions. Carrier proteins bind and carry the molecules across the cell membrane. These proteins bind a molecule on one side of the membrane, change shape as they carry the molecule across the membrane, and deposit the molecule on the other side of the membrane. Even though a protein is involved in both these methods of transport, neither method requires energy. Therefore, these are still types of passive transport. Right? Reading the caption here. Protein channels and carrier proteins are involved in the passive transport. So they come in, the molecule changes shape and passes it through. See, there it's spitting it out. Comes in, it's inside, and then it gets spit out into the cell. 3.11 summary. Passive transport does not require energy input. An example of passive transport is diffusion, the movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Carrier proteins and channel proteins are involved in facilitated diffusion. And your review questions. Explain two ways materials can enter the cell through passive transport. Does passive transport involve an expenditure of much energy? Why or why not? How does oxygen move across the membrane? All right, I'll see you in 3.12.